Okay, I think we're live. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Fisicaro. I'm the superintendent of schools for the Haddon Township School District. We are a K-12 district in southern New Jersey. We're just outside of Philadelphia. Today, I want to welcome Jon Crispin of ESPN, but first acknowledge our sponsor, a nonprofit, Citrus, which stands for Character, Integrity, Trust, Relationships, and Success. Jon, welcome. We've known each other for more than 25 years now, man. We've had parts of this discussion many times, so this should be easy today. For those of you who may be joining us in the audience, I'm going to play the role of host today. Feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat box, and I'll do the best I can to pitch them to our guest. Why don't you begin by telling us about your current role as an analyst and the role that character has played in your own personal journey?
Way to start off with a doozy there. First off, I'm going to have to really work to get through these formalities. The fact that you're wearing a suit, the fact that you're Robert and not Bobby, I'm going to have to work through that a little bit. I think throughout the process of this conversation, we'll probably eliminate a lot of those formalities. So what I do, I'm a college basketball analyst in terms of the day job, but I work in television. That's what people know. You'd see me on television. I call college basketball games from the arena. I do college basketball studio shows for ESPN. I host radio for SiriusXM, and I do the NCAA Tournament for Westwood One Radio. So that's the fun part, superficially, of what I do. But what I really get to do is I get to observe. I get to watch programs. I get to watch people. I see social dynamics play out within a team setting, within a competitive environment. And I find that to be the most fascinating thing about what I get to do. I learn a lot of good things and I learn a lot of bad things. And I see consistencies and inconsistencies. And even within those consistent inconsistencies, you find patterns. And you start to establish kind of what makes a team work. And then within that team, you start to establish what makes individuals work. And I find this conversation to be fascinating because that to me is so much of what I do. Character assessment, right? We assess skills, we assess abilities, but ultimately it's the character of a team that makes you a winner. Now, maybe not always on the superficial level of success, right? But everyone should have their own defined definition of success. And most good programs do. Most good programs have a culture that's tied to deep-rooted definitions of what these things mean to us. And that's the best part of what I get to do. Now, when it comes to the character part, it's one of the most challenging things, particularly in our world today, especially, since the dawn of social media. Our business has turned into making news, not reporting it. Our business has turned into have an opinion, bury your perspective. And I disagree with all of it. I can't stand it. So maybe that's an example of my own personal standards and character. But I feel like my responsibility within this job is to shed light on what you don't see, and really teach a little bit more about what's actually happening, some of the real challenges. And ultimately, it's those real challenges that make teams good, right? It's those real challenges that help people grow. Whereas we want to focus so much on the surface. I try to avoid that. And I'll tell you, in my world, it's one of the harder things to do because when you avoid that, you sacrifice a degree of success, right? You sacrifice a following on Twitter. You sacrifice maybe opportunities professionally when ultimately you're rewarded for making news, right? Having a strong opinion that is unfounded in every possible way, but it gets you to click on the story. That's one of the more challenging things with our business, with my role within this business and the realities that we have ahead of us. Because it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's only going to be getting worse, only going to be getting tougher. But ultimately, I find that like my career in sports, my career in broadcasting is a great test of character. It's a test of morality. It's a test of my own personal standards. And those are tests that are never going to go away either. So I welcome them.
And listen, this is great timing because I know that you've covered most of the NCAA tournament. We're right in the middle of March Madness, and we're looking forward to getting your perspective on where the gap is in character and where the bright spots are. But, first, I'd like for you to talk about, I know you're a humble guy when it comes to your playing career, right? But, you were a top 100 player in the country as a high schooler. You were a member of the Sweet 16 team at Penn State. You later went on and played at UCLA. who shaped your character that helped you through those formative years? Who made the biggest difference for you?
Well, the real character shaping goes back to the foundation. And I always go back to obviously my parents, but also my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, Cliff Crispin, who when people like to remind me how easy my life is, I said, well, that's because of the sacrifices and the struggles and quite frankly, the suffering of those that came before me. And that was my grandfather. He was really the first in his family to play sports. They were just a bunch of dirt poor farmers.
Right.
Lost his mother when he was 5 years old, lost his father when he was 16. They moved every year just because the taxes were due, type of thing. Had to go to a military school to be able to eventually get to Temple and play basketball. And there's something that always hits me in the head when I think about my own demands for success, my demands within the industry, my demands as a player. I go back to my grandfather and the opportunities he had to coach Division I, which I never really knew much about until his retirement dinner. And I always said, why did you never take those opportunities? You know, like you could have been a Division I head coach. Isn't that what we want to do, right? Strive for the next level. Now what? Now what? And he said, you know what? I had what I never had growing up. I was like, what's that? He says, a house, a community, a family, like people I'm responsible for. And that at the time, you know, I was probably 20 years old at the time when he retired, and it didn't really make that much sense to me. But the older I get, the more it really rings true. And I think it's one of those things where I'm reminded of that as I have children. I'm reminded of that when I see the world as crazy as it is and say, well, let's simplify things. What's important? So to me, there's character developed throughout the course of a playing career from coaches, from other players. Right. They're things you perceive, right? You perceive, you know, it's human morality in a way is what character is, to some at least. And, you know, it's the observation of what we would consider human morality. Well, I view that behavior as good more so than easy, right? You know, you're choosing good over easy. And then I go back to my grandfather and go, he chose good over easy. And he chose truth over chasing some nonsense that really is rooted in what other than selfish consumption. Sure. So I think my core, maybe I'll put it this way, to me, there are two kinds of character, right? There's the observed character, which is obviously a superficial expression, right? People view that and perceive that in one way or another, but usually it's tied to that human morality where we say, oh, that's good behavior. That's observed character. But my core character ultimately comes from that foundation. And I feel like that is what is perpetual. That's what's sustainable. That's what allows you to actually continue to build with a consistent pattern where the core is actually reflected on the surface, and the surface is merely a reflection of who you are at the core. So ultimately, that's my foundation. I keep coming to the foundation, man. Throughout my life, the walls have been knocked down multiple times, and what's left standing? What's the foundation? Sure. And the foundation's great, so you keep building on top of it. Yeah. And I think as we go through all these different phases of life, whether it's college or pursuing a professional career, pursuing a profession like broadcasting, it's really easy to lose bits of yourself. But ultimately, that foundation is ultimately what grounds you.
Yeah. You know, that's true. And I think we're both lucky. We're both coming from places where we had parents and grandparents who, you know, and your grandfather especially always had, a lot of humility, and he demanded humility of others, you know, especially his grandkids. Myself too, two parents that were, always present for everything. That, my dad was a Philadelphia school teacher for 30 years, coached a variety of sports. And certainly, we had that advantage from a foundational standpoint of, just the value of presence. So how about in those formative years? My first, you mentioned the tie, and I think one of the things I learned in Catholic school, attending middle school at St. Rose in Haddon Heights, having the opportunity to have, I guess we can say basketball coach, but he was more of a mentor, Tim Lenahan.
Yep.
Would just weave in character lessons right in the middle of practice. We would walk in practice and we would just kind of look at the doorway and keep practicing. And he would stop and he'd say, "What's the matter with you guys? Didn't you say hello to so-and-so?"
Yeah.
And, when he'd correct us, there was only one answer, and it was yes, sir, or no, sir, depending on the question. But in your formative years, were there any coaches that kind of shaped and molded you as a young man to help you understand that maybe you weren't the center of the universe, and that you were part of something larger than yourself, and the construct of a team.
Yeah, well, look, I think it was all of them in their own way, even the ones that weren't good at it. That's the thing. Like when you look back, you don't remember all the things that you didn't like as a kid because your perceptions have changed, right?
Yep.
My perspective has changed. I'm grown up a little bit, so I view those things differently. So I would say every single one of them, because within the world of sports, and this is something that like we don't talk about enough in the business I'm in, is the most important thing is accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's universal accountability for our core principles, that aids in the development of character.
Sure.
Right? You understand what matters, and it matters more to the group than it does just to you, and their needs supersede yours. Like that's a great character lesson. So I find that every single one of them, and you could discern too, as a player, as a kid, kids have great instincts. You and I talked about this the other day. Like kids pick up on things that you don't realize you're kind of projecting. Like they have good instincts. Now they're misguided at times because they're often self-consuming, but the reality is, man, they have good instincts, and you've got to be careful. They pick up on inconsistencies really well. But every coach had different things that they valued, and a lot of that was based on what they were taught, you know. And sometimes there was serious character flaws within people who are good teachers of character, which is but it's a reality, right? You see it a lot today in the professional world. You see it in college sports, right? Where seriously flawed individuals, and the reality is we all are, but seriously flawed individuals with selfish motivations who actually have good lessons of character. And ultimately I found that in the accountability portion of being a player. Sure. And having that healthy fear of authority, right? Which is another challenge of today's world is where do the healthy fears lie, right? And I say, again, healthy fears, not fear of authority, but a healthy fear of a teacher, healthy fear of a principal, healthy fear of adults. But ultimately, there's a lot of responsibility that comes from that.
Yeah.
So when I look back and I see like, yeah, I learned different lessons from different coaches. I can't say one in particular or the other. It was all within that accountability that was more focused on the group as opposed to myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of character is if you see yourself first, then you have problems. You certainly need a certain degree of self-awareness, you know, not self-consumption, but self-awareness if you actually want to develop it and maintain, sustain perpetually character. Accountability is huge. And I feel like I got more of that through sports than I did anywhere else outside of my parents raising me. I didn't have that same level of accountability when it came to school because I was good enough. I would always figure it out. I was fine. I did well enough that I didn't really need to be held accountable. But in sports, there was a standard that you had to live up to. And then there was the standard of your own expectations and the expectations that a team or a coach may have for you. And that was a big piece in developing character. So again, something that we almost try to avoid today to keep people happy and comfortable is accountability. Well, that was a big piece of the character we developed.
Sure. So, John, there's a big character gap right now, you know, not only in, you know, education, you know, not only in life, but certainly, you know, in the world of, you know, high level college athletics. You know, would love to get, you know, your view on, you know, let's define the problem. You know, what is the problem from a character perspective in this? It's not even a multi-million-dollar business anymore, right? Is it $1 billion business? I mean, you know, you know,
more than that.
You know, if you had to describe the problem, how would you describe it?
It's probably in the money, right? But then you have to say, well, why is it the money? Well, it's because ultimately, if you say why, you realize you get down to disjointed and misaligned motivations. I mean, think about that. Motivations are ultimately what we should be trying to mold, right? We try so hard to put nice brick on a surface, but the reality is, what good is it if the foundation stinks? What good is it if it's a paper mache house? You know, that the brick does nothing. You push it right over. So I feel like if we don't really address the realities within people's emotions, right? I think teams get this better than other groups, like other professional groups. I think teams, ultimately, you can stick that common goal, that common bond in the middle of the room, and that helps you align motivations. And then as a coach, you can sit there and stop and say, hold on, how is your personal motivations, which are taking you sideways, how is that helping the group? So I feel like there's ways to fix it, but I feel like the motivation has become so focused on money. And that is not just from the bottom up, it's from the top down, right? the NCAA is focused on money. Schools are focused on money. You know, a basketball program itself is focused on the type of money it can make and the type of money it can spend. And then the individuals within that program, they want money. I mean, you look at our world today, and I do feel like sports is a great example of life, right, in society, but it's played out in a competitive environment with a lot of money on the line. But if you look at what we've done in college basketball, college sports in general, there's two things that are band-aids on bigger issues: name, image, and likeness, which is it's a valid thing to bring to the table. Kids can make money off their own name, image, and likeness, NIL. That's a real thing. And I think we need to be good about allowing kids to make money off their own brand. I think they do come in with their own brand. Social media is a real thing. They have a following. So in a way, they should be able to capitalize on that. But where does that put the focus?
Sure.
You know, they're still kids. And I think that's the thing. It's like, yes, kids should be able to make money off their own self. I get that. But man almighty, we know what money does to adults. You know, it's obviously going to be difficult to align motivations within kids who all selfishly want to succeed and then also start to see one another on one team as competition, right? Yeah. The other thing we added was a transfer portal, which sounds great because ultimately what it is we say, well, you can transfer one time without any penalty, meaning you don't have to sit out like I did when I transferred to UCLA back after Penn State. You don't have to sit out. You can play right away. Well, that coupled with name, image, and likeness is becoming this big money grab. Now you have 2-year teams. So what do you have with 2-year teams that you don't have with a 4-year team? Trust, accountability, the development of habits, all those things that become the cornerstone of the character you talk about. You know, responsibility alone. You don't feel a responsibility to one another because how long are you really going to know this person? And quite frankly, that guy's in your way. You know how much money he's getting. You know whether he's performing or underperforming. And that becomes a challenge. And ultimately, we choose to pursue things that serve us selfishly more so than serve the group. And quite frankly, we don't even know what it means to serve the group anymore so long as we can get ours. And that's not just sports. I mean, if you think about those mentality within that, right? The focus within that, it's self. The focus is self. And as much as we need to be aware of ourselves and work on ourselves, we also need to be more aware of kind of how we perceive the world, right? It's the algorithm of thought. You know, it's not even just the algorithm of thought. It's the need for the algorithm in the first place. How do we perceive at the deepest level? Like we don't think enough about that. And I think teams can expose that over time, but it's getting harder and harder when you start looking at the transfer portal, NIL. So players making money, some players not. How do you bring all that together? It's getting tougher and tougher.
So you're getting to see very talented athletes when they get to be about 19 or 20 years old or 21, and the results of all this, and you know the behaviors that are shaped by social media. Yeah. You know, what would you say to someone like me, a K-12 educator? You know, I have them from 5 years old to 18. You know, before you get to see them at 19. You know, what's the role of what's the future of education look like in terms of getting students to understand the skills necessary to be a little bit more selfless and have a better perspective on the value of, fitting into something bigger than themselves, so to speak.
Well, I think it also comes down to what you communicate and how you communicate it, right? We think of communication as what we're doing right now, but it's not just that, right? What you communicate is how you dress, how you present yourself, how you discuss certain things. Right? The emphasis you put on certain things, and there should be a consistent emphasis on the things that matter the most. We live in a crazy world of nuance, yet nobody wants to have a conversation about nuance. We want to have a conversation about one or the other. Everything becomes more absolute, yet the world is more nuanced than it's ever been before. And I know that because let me just look around you, but also the world of sports is more nuanced. There's more variables, and more variables means more nuance. And you have to be able to work within that. I think you need to have more of an absolute approach to the things that you know to be true and foundational to education, right? Good habits, accountability, respect. I mean, all the things that we're talking about today, character building. Like you really need to have a heavy emphasis on the foundation that actually gives you the opportunity to develop as an individual. Because the reality is, like I say, when I speak to kids and I'll speak at broadcast journalism classes and I'll tell them, like, what do you think you're here to do in school? And I just always want to just hear what people say. that's to get a degree, hopefully get a job. And I say, no, you're here to learn how to learn. Like that is the lesson in life. You're always going to be doing that. If you can learn how to learn and set yourself up with the right building blocks, the foundation that allows you to learn how to learn and never stop learning, that makes you dangerous. Next thing you know, it actually makes you wise as opposed to knowledgeable. A lot of people who are knowledgeable, they don't really know much, but they think they do. But how many people are wise? How many people have built with consistency? How many people have built through struggle? How many people who have built through suffering? Or it's hard to build through success. Why? Because we gloat in our success. It's celebrated too much. And we celebrate ourselves because of social media. So it's getting harder and harder. But I think it's a consistent adherence to the foundation, the things that we know are true, universal truths. And how you communicate about those things, I think matters. Like I said, kids have great instincts. How you communicate, which again, everything you do, everything you say, your body language, how you dress, how you react to certain things, it's communicating something. So I think we really need to be cautious of how we're communicating and what we're communicating about the foundation that we're about to build on. Because look, we can't build the walls for them, right? Like you got to build your own walls. You got to finish your own home. That's how you perceive life. It's how you perceive information. There has to be some sense of critical thinking within there, but critical thinking, when done with a good foundation, it should put you on the right path. And with accountability and good habits, I mean, that's where you start to see individuality played out in a classroom. Everybody's going to perceive things differently. And that's okay. That's a part of this nuanced, crazy world. But with a foundation built on character, respect, trust, accountability, good habits, that's how you're setting the kid up for their own success, not just your perception of success.
Someone just said recently to me, kids, will not always do what you say, but they'll never fail to imitate you.
Yes.
And the value of the feeling, the relationship, that an individual has with the individual player or the individual student, I think is often underestimated. How you actually make the student feel. How does the individual feel in the environment? Does the adult believe in the student? Because we communicate that non-verbally, whether we believe or not.
Which is more obvious. The nonverbal is more obvious. Look, I joke with people and I always tell them I do my best listening when I'm talking. And they're like, really? I said, well, it's kind of how the world is today. Like, what do you mean? They think it's just because I like to talk and I'm paid to talk for a living. And I say, no, you tell me more truth in what I see and feel than what you say. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a reality in the world. And you got to know kids do perceive that way. There's more truth in them in terms of what they see and what they feel. Because look, kids are encouraged now more than ever to feel more, more. Sure. Maybe not think so much, but feel more. So what they see and feel is important. Now, the goal is we should be helping people perceive better, right? Help them perceive what they see and feel better. Not tell them what to perceive and feel better, but help them along the way. The concept of why, keep asking why until you get to this root cause, this deep-rooted motivation, this ignition moment, whatever you want to call it. I think that's how you find your personal truth, and that's ultimately how you help kids build that character.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to walk into a job 3 years ago. Our high school, has been emphasizing the idea of emotional intelligence and hiring, specifically hiring teachers with very high levels of emotional intelligence, and it's made a huge difference in culture.
Yes,
because this idea of an energetic connection, right? Kids picking up on the adult's energy, I think is so important to the foundation.
Well, and the culture piece you talk about, like that's one of the biggest keywords in sports. Oh, they have a great culture. Well, it's like, yeah, they do, but what is that? Define it. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like you can't really define it until you see it. Mm-hmm. And you can't really create it until it is what you are. And that's where it becomes consistency. Look, culture without consistency is not culture at all. It's just an outcome we like, right? It's an outcome we feel comfortable with. Well, this team worked out. We have great culture. No, you just won enough games. And they seem to like each other because you won enough games. But what's your culture like when you struggle? Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing I always focus on. When I talk to coaches, we talk a lot about that. And I said, yeah, you guys have great culture. You're 12-2. Mm-hmm. What do you like when you're 7-7?
Sure.
That's more of a defining characteristic of your real culture. Do you have chemistry when you struggle? Well, if you don't have chemistry when you struggle, then you don't have culture, because obviously your culture is based on an outcome, not a process.
Are kids afraid of failure now?
Mm-hmm. They're defined by it. Look, we are
Mhm.
no question in so many ways defined by our failures because they're public. Everything we do now is public.
Yeah.
Like everything, you work for a school district. If
Yeah.
you didn't do your job, everybody knows about it. In a way, it's there. It's rooted in us. Now, how we process that, right? Go back to the algorithm, right? How do we process that? Can we rationalize and change the algorithm to perceive things differently? We can, if we really take the time to expose ourselves with vulnerability, to really expose our process. Say,
Mhm.
why do I perceive it that way? Oh, what bias am I applying to that thought process?
Mhm.
Kids don't really go through that. They're defined by a surface. Social media defines them by a surface.
Mhm.
Everything they do, the success on the and look, we've done so much to. It's funny we do this whole thing in sports, right? Where everybody, it's the whole concept of everybody gets a trophy.
Mhm.
Well, is that because we're encouraging kids to just play and enjoy themselves, or are we almost afraid to let them fail? And
Sure.
in doing so, we're then defining them by failure by saying you're not allowed to fail. Like I think again, what's communicated and what's said is different. And I think we're almost playing into the world that we fear for them as opposed to building them for the world that is.
Yeah, I mean, one example, and most school districts and most classrooms don't do this anymore, but an example of how kids learn from failure is like your old spelling bee, right? From 20
Yeah.
years ago, right? You line
Yeah.
kids up and you have a spelling bee, and then like a year later, 5 years later, kids remember like how humiliating it was when they got
Yes.
knocked out of
Yeah, and you know what they do when they remember that?
Yeah.
You know what it was like? So when I stepped up to the free throw line and I missed a couple free throws and we lost the game,
Mhm.
I failed. I
Mhm.
failed in front of people. It was public.
Yep.
What did that do? Made me practice free throws,
Sure.
right? When I looked like a fool and couldn't spell I don't know pizza
Yeah.
in first or second grade, whenever that was,
Mhm.
I felt foolish in front of my friends. Like, is it a problem? Could I be picked on? Yeah, maybe I was. Maybe my friends did that. But you know what I did? Next time we did spelling, I actually paid attention. And my quiz grades were actually better.
Sure.
So in a way, we almost have to redefine things for them. And again, make it more on the process and less on the outcome. Like this is an outcome oriented world, no question. Like I will be defined by what level I'm at when I finish my broadcasting career, how much money I make, right? That'll be what, perceivably the world defines me by. If that's what I'm living for, I'm done. Like there's no way I'll ever achieve anything, and there's no way I'll ever have peace and clarity. There's no way I'll ever have character. My standards will be beholden to a certain outcome. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be based on the process. And we always say, like, run your own race. We have cliches all the time in sports. You know this. You've heard them all. Coaches are great at it. We're next man up. We're going to run our own race. Well,
Sure.
okay, that's true. But whoever really thought about that? What does it mean to run my own race? Like that means I'm not compared to the person next to him. I'm only compared to me yesterday. Like it's hard to do that. You're almost reprogramming kids. But again, it comes back to what you communicate. Where's the emphasis? What's most important? What's most important is a foundation. Next step is the process you go through to build on that foundation.
And how about the idea of embracing authenticity, right? Is anybody, just comfortable in their own skin anymore that's, under the age of 30 years old?
Well, we celebrate, like, think about the individuality we celebrate versus the authenticity we reject. Like, we really celebrate this concept of individuality, but it's not often authentic to that person. It's just accepted by the world. It's a new social norm that becomes acceptable, and then in chasing that, we lose authenticity. We lose sincerity. Like you can get away with a lot as a coach if you're true, sincere, and authentic. Like Tom Izzo, he's a good friend. There are times on TV where people are going, I can't believe he looks like he's going to kill one of those guys. I'm like, you know what, though? He is sincere and authentic with them. And he does more work in his office with one individual sitting there for hours, just working through their life than you'll ever know. So there's an equity built in there. We want to celebrate individuality that goes all over the place. But the reality is we should be celebrating authenticity to that individual. And part of that is getting to understand the individual, not just who they are and what they want to be, but how they think, how they process, right? Their own personal patterns. And I think that's what I like to do in my people watching. I like to find the patterns within the individuals, and I like to find the patterns within the individuals that impact the patterns within the team.
Yeah.
It's nauseating, But man, when you see it come together, you realize, well, that's what makes them good. That's what makes this individual good. This individual doesn't see this as an opportunity to be in this position. He sees it as a responsibility. And because he sees it as a responsibility, he's the best player on the floor. Other guys get in line and they buy into their role more because this guy views their star role as responsibility. It's amazing. The little things like that and how it impacts everything else.
There's a question in the chat generationally, right? So I use this
Yeah.
big example, and the data shows that 5 years later the kids don't remember the words they got right from the spelling bee. They remember the one they got wrong, and they'll never spell that wrong. They'll never spell that word wrong ever again, right? So the idea of learning from failure.
Yeah.
The question in the chat is, when today's kids seem to fail, they go down in the meltdown mode, right? How do we prevent that? You see the kid melting down on the sideline or melting down in the classroom after a bad grade. Why did this become so traumatic? Are parents putting too much pressure on kids? Are grades the problem? Are National Honor Societies the problem? Are college and the SATs an issue? Like, what is it? Why is its failure so heavy for today's generation?
Because we don't define things properly. Define failure. Kid feels badly about something. Well, what happened? Well, we lost. Okay. What's the big deal? Well, they thought we would win. Okay. So you believe you failed. Why did you fail? Expose that. Again, why? But this is the problem. Like, generationally, the disconnect, it just demands more of our time. It demands more of our consideration. It demands more of our understanding. And frankly, that's not just generational. That's just across the board. Like, we live in a world where we need more understanding than we need. We don't need these gaps, these gaps of judgment of that's failure and this is success. Like, doesn't work that way. It's all just life playing out. Right. When I got to that point where I finally was like, I'm no longer defined by failure. Like, what is it anyway? Like, failure to who? I developed a mindset of now what, right? After going, why do I define it that way? Why does that even matter? Why do those people matter to me? Why do I even think that I should be defined by them? Like, once you get through that, you start to take on this approach of now what? Okay. So I didn't get that right. And I failed in front of people. Look, I've called games or I've said something dumb and on national television. Am I defined what everybody thinks by what everybody thinks about me, or can I be better?
Sure.
It's this now what approach, but you really have to understand people more today than ever before, because again, the variables, the nuance. Like, if there's a million new variables in my life, that means there's a million new variables in yours, and there's a million new variables in some other kid's life, and every one of those variables is perceived an individual way, right? We perceive our variables differently. It's personal to us. Can you imagine the chaos we're going to have 50 years from now if we really don't focus on foundational understanding of one another? It's like, who am I? And you don't argue with it. Kid feels like they failed. That's fine. Well, who am I to argue their reality? Let me just help them understand it. Let me understand how it can be the best piece of making them better. I didn't know that. But that now what approach it's a winner's approach. And a lot of coaches I talk to, they try so hard to get that, but they make $5 million a year. And that's something that they covet. So fear creeps in. So it's really hard to have now what. It's more about a now what, right? Or a what now, excuse me. So I think that's the challenge, is really finding understanding within their process, but also redefining what they say is success and what they say is failure.
Yeah. So you have head coaches that are making millions of dollars a year.
Yep.
You have school leaders that are, measured in the newspaper by test scores. Parents that are working, oftentimes, multiple jobs and raising a family. Are we living in a culture that does not allow for children to express a full spectrum of emotions?
Yes and no, but the emotions we allow them to express probably they're not always rational. Right. Because a lot of the times, like, parents feel defined by their kids' success or failure. No way around that. Right. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and to a degree, I can catch the patterns that lead to that. I see it. Yeah. Like, if my kid can dribble, my 3-year-old can dribble 5 times and make a shot. There's a pride in there. So, and how do I express that pride? Right. Well, I express it in a way that my kid picks up. I don't even realize I'm doing it. So, go back to the question again. Ask me the question again, because I lost my pattern.
Yeah. Do we live in a culture that does not allow for a full spectrum of emotions to be experienced?
Again, I go back to yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they're guided.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're expressive, but not understood.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, it's easy to express emotions for things we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I think if anything, we're suppressing the expression of emotions of things that they like, because we're really doing more to tell kids what they should
Sure.
strive for.
Sure.
We define achievement through so many things. Now, again, I'm not on the educational side of things, so I can always speak for the sports side of things. But how do we define success? Well, that's a communication, and that makes it hard. That makes it hard to allow kids to fail, right? This is what you have to achieve. So go succeed. Well,
Sure.
when we're to put that kid in a position, a lot of times we put them in a box just because that's what we think he can do, but in a way we limit them.
Sure.
And within a team structure, you keep them in that box if it serves your interests well. So we don't let the kids succeed or fail.
Yeah.
And in so many ways, we don't let them express themselves. But again, the expression, it's really hard because it's so situational. There are some kids that you need to encourage to express themselves more. There are other kids that you need to just settle down and say, hey, think a little bit. Like I always say as an analyst, I can say what I think because I think about what I think about, right? I think about what I think about so I can say what I think.
Yeah.
Those people just say what they feel.
Yeah.
Right. So really, it's like we should encourage people to say what they think and discourage people from immediately just saying what they feel. That's great. You feel that? That's good. Have you thought about it yet? No, didn't think so. I do that in my business all the time. Someone says, I can't believe this. I said, really? Stop and think about it. Add your own life experiences to
Sure.
that situation and think about it. And I guarantee you change your perception. When
Yeah.
you do, there's more grace. When you do, there's more understanding. And there's a better way to perceive it in a way that you can actually make it a positive. So, yeah, I think it's one of the more challenging things.
Sure.
It's really challenging.
One of the things I think that is kind of lost is that I've noticed students and adults is it's not necessarily about our thoughts and our emotions. It's about our behaviors, right? And I could feel frustrated but still act with kindness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, character is not measured by what we think or how we feel, but how we actually act day to day, relationally amongst the group, for motivationally, right? I mean, it seems to me like there's no more space between an emotion and an action. It's like, oh, I feel angry, I'm going to scream and holler now. It's have we lost the ability to process these things and change these things and think before we act? Are you seeing that on the college basketball court? Are you seeing it on the sidelines?
Well, yeah, because I think the shallowness of our world almost encourages us in so many ways to seek approval, right? And that approval seeking, that goes in different directions throughout the different phases of our life. So if you think about the approval I seek from my parents, then the approval I seek from my friends, the approval I seek from a teacher, professor, the approval I seek from my coaches, the approval I seek from the fan bases. We spend so much time seeking approval that we really never build on that foundation that becomes a biggest piece of who we are. And frankly, I think it's gotten to a point where when it comes to character, the character changes with the company we keep. That's a major concern to me. And I think you see that with kids play out. You see it in the different groups of kids and friend circles and teams. They're a certain person with a certain character in this group, and there's someone different, and it's based on what's accepted. Right? And in so many ways, what's accepted, it becomes what's expected. Right? Because if you don't conform to this line of thought, then you're out. And I think that's the thing. Like I always say, like the biggest key to education is getting people to think. That's it. Like if I can make you think, then I did my job. Like I can't tell you how to think. I can't tell you what to think. Your own realities tend to do that. But I see that in teams today. Like I watch teams play and I'm like, robots. You see robots. They don't think for themselves. They don't even apply instincts, let alone intellect, right? We all have different levels of intellect. Some of us are deeper thinkers, right? We process a lot differently, but other people just function, they appearing to function more on the surface, but you don't realize where they apply that intellect. It's in different, and you really got to expose that in ways, but you have to expose that by getting them to actually think. So it's like the quick reaction, think before we speak. We grew up with that, right? Think before you speak. That was like something that I know my mother had to say to me all the time.
Sure.
I tended to say exactly whatever I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I'm like, it makes sense, because what good am I if I'm thinking one thing 1 minute and then 10 minutes later with a different perspective, I'm thinking something completely different.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because I never really applied critical thought to it.
Mm-hmm.
I never applied personal truths to that, right? My core character, that thing that flags situations, right? Your core character in so many ways flags something, screens it, says something's wrong. There's an inconsistency with my core truth, right?
Sure.
I see something, I perceive it differently, say there's inconsistency there. This is how I view it. And then hopefully on the surface, if that thing is, if I'm consistent in the core as I am on the surface, then surface is a reflection of my core, and the core is the whole impetus for my surface.
Yeah.
So I think that's getting harder and harder, but I think it just means we got to teach differently.
Yeah.
We got to communicate differently. And each individual, this is the biggest challenge. It used to be, when a team shows up, and you could say a team or you could say a classroom. It's basically the same things, the same human dynamics, social dynamics at play, pecking order, all the different things that you see play out in the classroom, the same in the locker room. The coaches used to be respected for being your coaches.
Mm-hmm.
It's different today. You don't come in as a player and say, that's my coach, I respect him, right? But the most important thing on a team is the proper balance of trust and respect, right? Players have to respect their coach. Coach eventually has to trust their players. Well, it's different now. Coaches now have to empower and show trust in their players while showing value in what they do as a coach to get their respect. Now, a lot of us, I've become the get off my lawn guy, apparently. And I always say, get off my lawn unless you can make it greener type of thing.
Yeah.
Like I do believe there are certain things, but it's easy to say, well, when I was growing up, we respected our coach. It's not their reality. Their reality is different than ours. So why are we trying to convince them of something that we know to be truth and that's not they don't see that communicated to them throughout the course of their world. Yeah. That's their reality is different. So instead of arguing their reality, just get to where we need to get to in the end. Mm-hmm. So the best coaches, they don't fight that and say, you need to respect me. I'm your coach. I control playing time and you're not going to play unless you listen. Those kids are gone. Kids have more power. Professional athletes have way more power.
I think it doesn't work.
We're not about this. The end is the key. So if the key is the proper balance of trust and respect, who cares how you get there?
Yeah.
So the best coaches, the humble, secure coaches are the ones that get there because they have no problem empowering and trusting those players to get to the point where those players see their value and respect them. And in the end, proper balance of trust and respect.
So it's a new paradigm in basketball. It's a new paradigm in schools. It's a new paradigm in families. That my way or the highway, punitive consequence, behavior modification, is not as effective as it used to be, 20 years ago or so. So it's a new paradigm shift. Who's doing it well? There are 68 teams in the NCAA tournament. Some of them, 390 teams now?
Yeah, I don't even know. 372 or something like that.
Wow. So, listen, as an analyst, you don't just show up at games and call and do the color commentary. You're there in practice, right? You do interviews, you spend time absorbing, what the program is. Where are the bright spots right now? I mean, Brad Stevens is no longer in college basketball. Yeah. Jay Wright is out, right? Two of my favorites. Where are the bright spots now, moving forward? Well,
the bright spots are often hidden by social media's perceptions, right? So there's a lot of social media out there, again, that loud minority who's saying that coach should be fired. Those are usually the ones that are doing it the best. Like the ones who you see, they've had success and now they have a bad year. It might be time to move on. It's because that guy's doing it right. It's because that guy cares about building something, playing the long game more so than just sacrificing his own integrity to win. Like there are statements in the struggles. And we try so hard to avoid them by judging these teams based on their success or failure. And I look at Chris Holtmann at Ohio State. He had a tough year this year, and people were saying, he should be fired. We should move on. Ohio State should be better. And I'm sitting there, it's because you don't realize what he's sacrificing. He's sacrificing a couple selfish individuals who don't help the team who might help them win a couple games, but doesn't help them in the long run and certainly would kill the program. In a way, you sacrifice making them the star because you know where it goes. Tom Izzo, he's been around forever, but what makes him good? He's able to adapt while being authentic. Like it's not the 60 or 70-year-old coach that's out there, in the locker room dancing with the players and trying to hang out and be one of them. That stuff doesn't work. Kids see right through it. And again, if you don't have that healthy fear, meaning like they understand you are the authority, they understand you're the adult, they understand you're in control, and you in so many ways give them security. That's the other part. Like these coaches that do it right, in the end, what players eventually learn is those guys are my security blanket. Those guys give me confidence. I don't have to absorb what they have to absorb, and they absorb it well. They suffer well. Yeah. They see that. And I think there are a lot of guys out there, again, you wouldn't know because what you hear on social media, but Tom Izzo, again, who's a friend, he's authentic, he's sincere, he's true to himself, he's true to his roots, that foundation, this Upper Peninsula, dead broke growing up kind of guy. Still coaches like that, but he also loves deeply. And he can be adaptable to different personalities. He doesn't argue that your reality isn't real. I think that's one of our biggest failures. And those are the ones that are failing. It's the authoritarian approach to say, no, it's absolutely this or absolutely that. There's nothing in between. The world is gray. It is really gray. And until we figure that out, we're going to be a mess. And kids are going to struggle with it. Adults are going to struggle with it. We're going to be stuck in the world that we grew up in, and the kids are going to be stuck in the world that they're growing up in. And if you think about the changes over the last 10 years alone, I mean, let's just go 2000, right? The dot-com boom. Look at the changes from 2000. I mean, just from a technological standpoint, you watch my college games on TV, it looks like the most pixelated version of old film that you could find.
Yep.
Wasn't that long ago.
Sure.
So if you look at the advancements and how that's connected us to so much else that kids will define themselves by, who are we to say that's not real? That is their reality. But we do have to be consistent enough with those foundational things that allow us to have value in their life, that allow us to help them perpetuate success, right? Perpetuate growth. Doesn't perpetuate some absolute achievement, right? That superficial achievement, but it allows them to gain comfort in a process. Yeah. And I think if we get so far down the road with kind of defining success on the surface, which I think the world does, right? The social world of social media certainly does. What you can project makes you who you are. That's brutal. That's the real challenge that we have. We didn't grow up with that, but we've got to find a way to speak to it. And I think we need to reward the process, reward the patterns that are good more so than any specific outcome. And that's just an adjustment that we have to make. That's what the best coaches do. They adjust. Yeah. I use the term adjustability. It's not really a word, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to have a bob and weave like adjustability with the people that you're bringing in on an annual basis. Sometimes you're bringing in people mid-season, and you have to be able to adjust to them to align motivations. And if you can align motivations, good things happen. And there are a lot out there that do it right, but there's also a lack of integrity in our world. And the more lack of integrity you have in our world, meaning basketball, the more you have those people succeed, the harder it is for people to actually apply character and integrity.
Sure. Adults are having trouble more, in my opinion, expressing love towards kids, and kids are having a harder time relating to adults and knowing that adults really believe in them, right? Another area that we're fortunate in, we both played for high school coaches that without question, they loved us and they believed in us.
Yeah, they're empowering.
And that kind of didn't only fuel us for our high school years. It fueled us beyond high school, right? But now, how many kids are in the transfer portal after this multi-billion-dollar tournament that's happening? Yep. There's going to be thousands of kids in Division I that are basically saying, I'm not happy here. I don't feel a sense of belonging. I don't feel a sense of significance. I don't feel successful. I'm not loved. I'm not cared for. I'm not believed in. I want to leave. So that's a big problem, right?
Yeah, sort of. It's just the next problem, right? Like it's a big problem, but it's no different than any problems we've had and faced before. It's just the next problem. Now, I think in today's world, you have to validate thought more. And what you do in validating thought is you encourage these kids to think more about how they feel. Like a lot of times these kids make decisions after one game. It's happening. Kid didn't like, he got benched. He's defined by that. He just reacts. And in a way, you have to encourage someone to think through it and express themselves. Like, if you think of the world of social media, well, what did the world of social media give kids that they never had before? I wasn't allowed to express myself the way kids can express themselves today. That was probably a good thing, right?
Sure.
Right? It was a good thing. Thank God for it. I would have been a mess. But at the same time, this is their world. This is their reality. So are we going to lock them in a closet for the rest of their life until, all this goes away after, Terminator Judgment Day happens? No, like that, it doesn't work that way. But we should encourage thought beyond the surface. We should encourage thought beyond what they're defining themselves by. And I think those are the things. Like, I'd be fine with it if a kid's like, look, I want to leave. I go, okay, well, so what made you, like, what brought you to this? And the second they start saying things, well, why was that important? Why would encourage thought? But the thing is, you got to do it with consistency. It is so easy for us. And when I say easy, there's right and there's easy. It is easier to just roll with it, right? It's easier to just say, I disagree, or that's ridiculous. It's easier to do that from a pride standpoint. But if you're really secure, like if you really have that peace and clarity and that conviction behind everything that you're doing, we should encourage kids to think. We should encourage kids to think through things, apply thought to their feelings, and express themselves in a thoughtful way, because that's what we need. Like, look, if we want to stop the cycle that we're in right now, get kids to think more. Don't tell them what to think. Get them to think more. And I mean, I see this. I speak at colleges, and it is alarming what the limitations on their thought process. It is alarming. And I'm telling you, it's to me is one of the more concerning things for that college generation right now. And I don't know what it is beyond that. I'm not as involved in high school. But the college kids I speak to, they're not learning how to process things. They're not even learning how to express their own thoughts and beliefs. They're learning how to say yes to whatever gets them the outcome that they want. And that's the world I'm in too, right? But if I'm 30, am I different than I am today? Probably. If I'm 30 and I just want to be on television and I want the opportunity to be on ESPN, right? I likely say yes to the things that I've had to say no to, right?
Sure.
I likely sacrifice my integrity and put my character aside to get what I perceivably want, right? Even though I haven't even really thought about what I actually want. I just, yes, that sounds good. I want that, right? That's pretty much the world we're in. So we do, like, stop, ask questions, find understanding. Like, there's more like we have this conversation a lot with coaches and players. The more you sit down and talk to a kid, the more connection points you find, right? Just talking through family, talking through struggles, talking to what they don't like about school. Let them express themselves in a thoughtful way, honor it. It's almost like the kind of the parenting style that is like, your kid's yelling and screaming. Well, do you tell them to shut up? Or do you hold them calmly, like you would train a puppy, because a lot of times we're doing that, right? There are times when we're teaching our kids, and there are times where we're training our kids. And the training is done more so with those subconscious perceptions, right? So why do you remain calm when you're trying to train a puppy? Well, it's going to perceive fear from me. It's going to be fearful of my frustration. Kids are the same way. So in a way, we have to get past ourselves and apply conviction and truth and clarity and a peace in what we know we're doing, which is the bigger picture, right? We're playing the long game.
Sure.
You apply that. You're not afraid to listen to a kid. You're not afraid to hear something that you completely think is ridiculous. But the more they express themselves and the more you communicate with them, the more they trust that peace that you exude. And that's what I find to be one of the most powerful things. Like, the world is so reactionary. The best leaders aren't. The best leaders have peace and clarity, and these kids feel it. And the thing is, they don't even know that they want it, and they do. Right? They know who the authority is, and the authority is not always the guy that's in charge. Right? You think like, oh, Bobby, you're in charge. There might be someone out there that has a really great way about them, and everybody looks to that person for leadership. I'm not really pointing you out or anything. You're just the only one on the Zoom.
Sure. No, I completely understand. So you have two children at home, two boys, both under the age of 5, right?
Yep.
What what advice would you give to, educators, coaches? Your kids are eventually going to be in school one day. They're eventually going to play on teams one day. What new paradigm, what encouragement would you give to educators in terms of the systems that we build, how we build them, and things that are emphasized?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I still think that we should understand the positives and the negatives of succeeding and failing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't avoid that at all with my kids. Like they're not going to win everything. If my kid's 5-10 years old and he wants to play one-on-one, he will lose.
Yeah.
He will lose.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't he lose?
Sure.
I'll have fun. We'll make it fun, but that's just a part of life.
Yeah.
Like, and if I were to dunk on a 7-foot rim and he would say that's not fair, I'd probably say, well, life's not fair. Like, I just think we dance around things that kids already know.
Mm-hmm.
The world conditioned them to think otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
They know it. They know it's not fair. They know life's not fair. They know they don't get everything that everyone else has. But the more you sit on social media, the more the world conditions you to believe that.
Mm.
So I think number one is you really have to monitor inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to police them, but you have to monitor them.
Mm-hmm.
You need to follow the patterns that change. The algorithm changes the more these kids perceive things, right? The algorithm in my brain changes when I watch a certain type of movies, or if I watch the news. If I watch the news too much, the algorithm in my brain changes, which means I perceive differently.
Sure.
Why is that? The world did that. So if you think that's not happening with kids, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
It's not about stopping it. It's about monitoring it. It's about guiding it. It's about establishing boundaries. And look, my oldest, Cam, I already know he can handle much wider boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
He manages the freedom within those boundaries pretty well. My youngest guy, he's like me. Like, he has learned the hard way, JJ. His boundaries have to be here, but it's more like a V, right? The more he goes, the more he earns. But it's with trust that he earns that. So I think we really need to establish the boundaries that are the building blocks of your behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we eliminate boundaries, that's the thing. We can eliminate certain things, whether it's the specifics of winning or losing or who gets a trophy. You can eliminate all that. But ultimately, we need to establish boundaries, which actually act as a framework to, let's say, like, within this, express yourself. Right. These are the absolutes in so many ways. It's okay to still have some absolutes, but within those absolutes, the personality becomes the nuance. Every bit of nuance, I perceive it this way. It takes me in this direction. Another bit of nuance, I perceive it this way. Monitor that. Find the patterns within it, because you find the patterns within that behavior, that perception, you find the truth at the core.
Sure.
And I maybe it's because I'm an older parent. I almost psychoanalyze my children, not in a weird way, but just in a I feel like the more you step back and react less, the more you perceive truth in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's so easy to react because the world is stressful, right? Yeah. Even my cush world, in the sense where I call basketball games, there's so many things that just make it stressful. Traveling.
Sure.
You travel 6 days a week. Go through the airports, man. It's stressful. So it's so easy to just react as opposed to stop and say, this behavior's within the boundaries. It's okay.
Sure.
Let me understand why he's doing this or doing that. Let me understand. Maybe he's just pushing a limit. Yeah, that's a new limit. He just started doing something that's new. He wants to see how far he can take it. Does he take it beyond the boundaries? If he doesn't take it beyond the boundaries, let's just watch how he guides himself back. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we need to sit back and observe, because I think you find more truth in the patterns than you do in the outcome of the behavior. And it takes a lot more time, but
I think it makes sense. I'm fairly certain, and you never know what happens in the future, but I'm fairly certain 10, 20 years down the line, the future of education is going to be a lot less teaching of content, because kids can learn content anywhere. And
everywhere.
A lot of the artificial intelligence things that are now a reality, what's even the real value of some of the content. But spending more time listening to children and setting the conditions in the environment to teach some of these, character building, values, but also emotional intelligence strategies to help students understand how to thrive, not only as individuals, but in groups, on teams, in classrooms, and families, right?
Yep. I mean, look at what CITRS. I mean, integrity.
Mm-hmm.
I think integrity is one of those things that we should define and celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
There's no character without integrity. And I think integrity is something that is even more personal than character, right? Somewhere in there, without integrity, I struggle to see you develop character. And I think we should celebrate certain things. Like teams have core values. Like I spoke at an event out in when I was living in Los Angeles, and a guy asked me to put together, my platform. I said, I don't have a platform. And he says, well, what do you have? And I said, you know what I'll do? I'll give you my mission statement, my personal mission statement. That's what companies do. And I'll give you my core values. So I did. I built this graphic of core values. And this was 12 years ago. So I built this graphic of core values, my 5 core values, and then what is exemplified on the surface.
Sure.
And you realize that if I really stay true to my core values, it's impossible not to exemplify these things superficially. But ultimately, I have to manage myself at the core. So what do we celebrate? Do we celebrate the surface? Do we celebrate the outcome? Or do we celebrate the motivation and the process? And I think we're at a time where we need to do more to communicating importance on the core and the process than the outcome and the surface, especially when you start applying things like, the intelligence that's out there. We can get information, but can we perceive?
Sure.
I think the perceiving of information is probably the most important thing at this point. And that perception should be personal.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jon, thanks for coming on and taking the time today. I'd like to, again, thank the folks for Citrus for hosting us. What a great opportunity we have to hear from you. You offer such a valuable perspective and such a unique perspective. So I'll end with probably the least of importance question, but probably the most fun. I know your bracket's busted. Right?
Oh, my gosh.
But you only have one. You have 4 teams left, right? So can you pick one out of 4 for us to end the program here?
I like UConn. I just think UConn can win in a variety of styles, but that UConn-Miami game is pretty much the national championship game.
Sure.
I feel like that's the national championship game. And but FAU, I had FAU at the Garden. I did the East Regional for Westwood One, and I had them against Tennessee and then again against K-State, and that was awesome. It was great to see them. And that guy, Dusty May, you ask about who's doing it right, he is. He's one of them. Yep.
And I'll tell you what, if UConn does pull it out, you have Dan Hurley there as the coach, coming from the son of Bob Hurley Sr., who you talk about a man who taught character and was a little more old school about it, but definitely aligns with a lot of the themes about accountability.
I saw him earlier this year and I asked him about that. I said, could you coach today? And he goes, oh, heck no. He goes, I'd either be fired or kids would all leave.
Yeah. I still come back to that documentary. My teams, think we're tough on them. I said, let's watch this documentary on that one up. So, all right. Well, listen, I know you've had fun throughout the NCAA tournament. I know you're a very busy guy. I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you. And if we have an opportunity to do it again, we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Take care, Jon.
Thank you.
Bye.